15 years ago, I divorced my first husband, a man whose promises of love turned out to be as shaky as the sand under my feet. Then my life seemed to crumble into thousands of pieces. The hard truth suddenly came to light, burning my soul. My husband, the man with whom I was building a future, betrayed me with someone who was once like a sister to me. He started an affair with my childhood friend, and a child was born from this union. Every day became a test for me, because his new partner did not miss the opportunity to humiliate me, to make fun of my vulnerability. I felt cornered. In the end, my patience ran out, and I left my job, losing the remnants of independence. Years passed, and in the midst of this emptiness and darkness, when it seemed to me that I would never get up from my knees, I met Patrick. His care and wisdom were my salvation. We went through difficulties together, and he helped me build a house full of warmth and comfort, filled with laughter and light. Our children, Liam and Emma, have become the meaning of my life, a source of endless joy and tenderness. Our life flowed calmly and steadily. It seemed that the past was forever buried under the weight of time. But a recent meeting with my ex-husband brought back a pain that I had long considered forgotten. We bumped into each other by chance, like two strangers, and looking into his eyes, I felt the same cold that once poisoned my soul. He did not fail to prick me, sarcastically remarking, "You must still be lonely, right? Who would marry a barren woman like you?" His words were full of arrogance, and a smug smile played on his face as he showed me his son, the fruit of his betrayal. He enjoyed this meeting, believing that I was broken. But this time I had an answer. I smiled, holding back my anger, and nodding towards where Liam and Emma were standing, I said, "Oh, really? What a cute kid. Let me introduce you to my children." My calm view of Liam and Emma left him stunned. Seeing how pale he turned, I felt a sweet note of victory. Yes, my children were everything to me, and not a single word from him could destroy the family I had created. I'm 38 now, and life goes on as usual. Liam, who is 13, is full of energy and rebellious spirit. He often tries to test the boundaries, but when it goes beyond what is allowed, Patrick with wisdom and patience puts him back on the path. Liam is smart and open to the world, his simplicity and charm know no bounds. And my youngest, Emma, is already passionate about makeup and fashion at the age of 11. She easily gets her way by charming everyone around her, and Liam, who does not hide his affection for his sister, obediently puts up with her childish manipulations. "If you're not polite to Mom, I'm going to start disliking you," she says with a sly twinkle in her eyes, and this makes Liam panic. He immediately apologizes, ready to do anything to regain his sister's favor. We live a hectic but happy life. I got divorced because of my ex-husband's dastardly betrayal. 15 years ago, in those distant years of youth and carelessness, Stephen and I seemed destined for happiness. He was older than me, he studied at the university, and perhaps it was his confidence, experience and calm manner that attracted me to him. Our friends were sincerely happy for us, showered with blessings and warm wishes. And it seemed to us that we were at the beginning of a long and prosperous path that would surely lead us to cherished happiness, filled with family dinners, children's laughter, and quiet evening walks. We dreamed a lot about the future and made plans. It seemed that we were bound by a strong desire to become parents, to raise children together, to surround them with care and love. Stephen often said that he couldn't wait to have a baby. In our conversations, we imagined tiny outfits with which we would surround our future baby, imagined how we would walk together in the park, holding hands, and between us was a small creature, the fruit of our love. But reality, as often happens, went a completely different way. A year later, when our dreams of having a child were still not coming true, I began to feel a chill of insecurity. Every month, when my period started, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. We both knew that time was passing, and the silent expectation of the miracle news was becoming painful for us. These moments began to sow discord in our relationship, at first timid and barely noticeable, but gaining strength every month. At the beginning of our attempts, Stephen remained attentive, patient and, as it seemed, ready to fight side by side with me. We discussed it, consulted with doctors, and, in the end, decided on expensive treatment to figure out why our dreams never became reality. However, when we were informed that no medical abnormalities had been detected, a barely perceptible anxiety lurked inside me. If everything is fine, then why don't we become parents anyway? Over time, when the treatments did not bring any results, the changes in Stephen became obvious. From a kind and patient partner, he began to turn into an irritated and intolerant person. One day, as if unable to contain the accumulated resentment, he threw at me, "When will I ever become a father?" His sarcastic intonation hurt my heart. I felt that behind his words there was an accusation, a hint that it was all my fault. At first, I didn't believe in what was happening. This man, with whom I was ready to live my whole life, became a stranger. Gradually, Stephen began to withdraw from household chores more and more often, as if deliberately distancing himself from me. I was left with all the household chores: washing, cleaning, cooking. One day, tired of his coldness, I still dared to ask why he had changed his behavior so abruptly. His response was like a stab to the heart: "Because you are infertile. If you can't give me a child, then the only role you have left is to be a good wife around the house." I stood in silence, shocked by the cruelty of his words. His eyes reflected cold anger, hidden contempt, and I, who had already lost the last remnants of self-confidence, could not hold back tears. His words kept ringing in my head, each word burning like a red-hot knife. My husband did not hide his conviction that infertility is a woman's fault. His words sounded like a sentence from which it was impossible to escape, and each time he seemed to deliberately stab them into my heart, with special cruelty. "If I had known that you were infertile, I would never have married you," he repeated with icy coldness. I tried to ease the pain, but every remark he made left sharp scars on my soul, like thorns digging into my skin. These words haunted me even in the silence of the night, turning into an agonizing whisper that could not be silenced. And as if that wasn't enough, my in-laws and in-laws on my husband's side began to show persistent and impatient curiosity. They called, congratulated us on the anniversary, and immediately, as if jokingly, hinted at the grandchildren. "We can't wait to see the baby," they said with a smile, waiting for my approving nod. I tried to brush it off, saying that only a year had passed, that the birth of a child was a gift that could not be accelerated. But these words seemed to ignite a new wave of impatience and discontent in them. Her mother-in-law became especially harsh. Her attitude towards me had changed, and she was increasingly making hidden accusations. In her eyes, I became a defective daughter-in-law, a woman unable to fulfill her destiny, and therefore useless. Every day this weight weighed on me. Surrounded by criticism, with accusing glances at every turn, I began to feel like a stranger in my own home, as if locked in a cage of their expectations and reproaches. It was during this difficult period that my best friend, Isabella, invited me for a drink. We haven't seen each other for a long time, and this offer was a real salvation for me. Stephen was constantly busy at work, spending long evenings in the office, and I was often left alone, absorbed in bitter thoughts. Therefore, without hesitation, I accepted Isabella's invitation. The warmth of her smile, her hugs were like a balm to my soul. We hugged, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "I've been wanting to see you for so long," she said, looking at me anxiously. There was something in her voice that was hard for me to understand. "I need to talk to you about Leah," she said with unexpected seriousness. I felt something dark, a long-forgotten shadow, stir in my heart. Leah. I almost pushed that name out of my mind, not wanting to think about her. Leah Leo was Stephen's childhood friend. They lived next to each other, and their families were inseparable, like close relatives. Our paths barely crossed at the university. She studied at another faculty, was in other clubs, occupied a place in the circle of popularity, which was alien to me. Tall and strikingly beautiful, Leah attracted everyone's attention. At college, everyone knew her, not only as a talented student, but also as a participant in beauty contests, one of those who predicted a bright future. When Stephen and I first started dating, he introduced me to Leah one day. I remember how her gaze slid over me, assessing me as if I were a random guest in her world, where Stephen was always there. Her piercing eyes flashed with barely noticeable contempt, as if I were unworthy. Stephen noticed the tension between us and tried to smooth it out by saying, "Leah is my childhood friend. Try to get along with her." These words only increased my anxiety. Leah didn't seem to want to lose her position next to Stephen. She carried herself with that self-confidence that often happens to people who are used to admiration and attention. The daughter of the CEO and a recognized beauty, Leah was not just an employee. Her presence in the office became an event, attracted attention and admiration. When Isabella whispered softly, "Leah, Stephen's childhood friend," I felt this image of the sweet and perfect Leah gradually turn into something menacing. Isabella's words sounded muffled, as if in a fog. Yes, I know her. She is incredibly beautiful and works with us, although we rarely cross paths. What about her? There was something tense and cautious in Isabella's voice. I don't want to be harsh, but I think Leah and Stephen are having an affair. I saw them recently. They were walking hand in hand, and it was not at all like the behavior of ordinary friends. These words echoed icily in me, as if in an instant I was on the threshold of a dark abyss. I sat there, motionless as a statue, stunned by the unexpected. "Are you sure?" I whispered, barely able to believe what I had heard. "Look, it's hard for me to judge, but I wish you knew that. If you need to talk, just call me, okay?" I could barely manage a quiet, "Thank you for telling me." An uneasy silence reigned inside me, and the suspicions that I had hidden in the depths of my soul for so long suddenly surfaced, naked and inexorable. Yes, I've noticed changes in Stephen, his sudden night shifts, frequent overtime, and odd weekend business meetings. My intuition told me that his constant excuses were not accidental, but I forced myself to close my eyes. I didn't want to destroy my world and believe that Stephen was only absorbed in his work, because it's so easy to deceive yourself if you're afraid to face the truth. The next day, gathering all my resolve, I headed to the detective agency. What a humiliation I felt, entrusting strangers to keep an eye on my own husband. But my mind whispered to me that I had to find out the truth, no matter how bitter it was. A week later, I had all the evidence, but a feeling of despair gripped me, and I did not dare to file for divorce right away. No matter how deceitful Stephen turned out to be, he was still the man I had once sworn allegiance to. I couldn't solve it in one moment, as if everything I had experienced and suffered over the years of marriage was worth nothing. A few days later, when I returned home late at night, I found Stephen sitting at the dining table. He seemed to be waiting for me, and there was a strange mixture of tension and confidence in this expectation. "Oh, you're home," I said, deliberately tinging my voice with sarcasm. "Yes, I thought you'd be late today," he replied, trying to keep his tone casual. But his eyes weren't smiling, and I felt the anticipation of something terrible increase. "I need to talk to you," he said coldly, looking straight into my eyes. Isabella's words echoed in my head, and I froze, realizing that this meeting did not bode well. "I want a divorce," he said, as if deciding whether to buy a new tie rather than break up the marriage. My hands trembled. "Leah, she's pregnant. I'm going to marry her," he continued, as if throwing every word in my face like a sharp blade that left a deeper wound with each blow. I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet, realizing that this was not just a fleeting affair, not just an affair, but something more. "Leah, your childhood friend, you said she was just a friend," I said with difficulty, and the words seemed to stick to my lips, leaving a bitter taste of resentment. Stephen was looking at me with a smug grin, and there was something cold and alien in his gaze. "Don't call it a romance," he chuckled, adding with indifference. "And what does it matter now? Leah can give me a baby, she's beautiful. I have no reason to choose you over her." His every word was beating inside me like a bell that announced the destruction of my life. Stephen's shamelessness and his complete lack of remorse stunned me. His gaze was cold and smug, as if he thought he had done me a favor by openly admitting his infidelities. I was speechless, frozen, feeling like my whole world was collapsing under the pressure of these difficult and cold words. Stephen, noticing my silence, only grinned mockingly and continued, adding insult to insult. "My mother, by the way, has been trying to persuade me to divorce you for a long time. She believes that Leah is better, she is both beautiful and kind, and most importantly, she can give birth to children. So it will make her happy." These words, like the blows of a whip, tormented me, shattering the last remnants of hope and trust. I always knew that my mother-in-law, like many in their family, certainly preferred Leah. Her exquisite beauty, easygoing nature, and natural feminine purpose were admired in Stephen's family, while I remained, in their opinion, only a shadow, unable to fit into their bright world. My confidence slowly dissolved as I stood in this room, which suddenly seemed completely alien to me, cold and inhospitable. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't let them break through. Not in front of him. Stephen shamelessly packed up his things and left, leaving me among the bitter wreckage of a once beautiful dream of a family. Later, I found divorce papers in the mailbox, sent unilaterally. Pinned to these papers was a note written in someone else's feminine handwriting: "Please divorce my husband as soon as possible." I stared at this note for a long time, feeling indignation boil up inside me. How could she ask for a divorce so shamelessly? Did I ruin their marriage? Did I take something away from her? These contradictory thoughts clouded my mind, but soon I felt clarity awakening in me. I couldn't put up with this humiliation anymore. Summoning all my willpower, I took the evidence gathered at the detective agency and filed for divorce through mediation. Now I had not only the right, but also the moral strength to fight for my honor and justice. A few days later, when I was already beginning to hope for the onset of quiet confidence in my decision, a call came from an unfamiliar number. When I answered the call, I heard a sharp and agitated female voice on the other end. Barely having time to imagine who it could be, I realized it was Leah. Her voice sounded shrill and irritated, and she hurled a torrent of accusations at me. "What are you doing? Why did you start a lawsuit?" Her voice trembled with rage. I took a deep breath, feeling inner peace before her storm of emotions. "It's quite natural, isn't it?" I said with icy calm. "I have proof of your relationship with Stephen, and I have every right to demand compensation for all the suffering caused to me." Leah screamed, clearly confused by my firm answer. "Compensation? But I'm pregnant. How can you be so cruel? I need money for the baby." Her voice was getting louder and fiercer again, cutting the ear like a blade. I couldn't stand it and answered, holding back a bitter laugh. "Who is cruel here? You're the one who got involved with a married man, and you're the one who ruined my marriage. You're infertile. You are a terrible woman," she screamed, apparently hoping to humiliate me with this. But those words couldn't hurt me the way they used to. I calmly picked up the phone and answered, "I intend to discuss the terms of the divorce and compensation in an official setting. I think you and I will discuss everything at the mediation." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of confidence and justice spreading inside. At the hearing, when evidence of his infidelity was presented, Stephen's relationship was officially recognized as adultery. When Stephen tried to accuse me of infertility in court, claiming that I hid it and tricked him into marriage, the judge only looked at him coldly and rejected the claim for complete lack of evidence. Our marriage lasted only a year, and we did not make any serious attempt to find out the reason for the absence of children during this time. The court, finding no basis in his accusations, ordered the payment of alimony to me in the amount of $20,000. But the real blow was to Leah. During the mediation process, it turned out that her behavior in relation to our marriage, together with the evidence I collected, forced her to pay me compensation, an amount that was 10 times the amount from Stephen, $110,000. After the divorce was finalized, I didn't want to see Stephen or Leah anymore. Their money became the final conclusion of that painful chapter of my life for me. But, as it turned out, the trials did not end there. We all studied at the same university, and the rumor of our divorce quickly spread among old friends. As it soon became known from a close friend, it was discussed in many companies and at friendly meetings that I seemed to be deliberately hiding my infertility in order to keep Stephen. Leah, with her angelic appearance and the status of the CEO's daughter, seemed to be playing the role of the unfortunate victim in this drama. Gradually, this echo reached our office. Working for the same company, I was forced to see colleagues gather around Leah every day, many of whom comforted her and shared her tragedy. In public, she pretended to be sweet and meek, sometimes even letting out tears, talking about how terrible I had done to her, demanding alimony, while she had a child on the way. She pretended that I was hiding my inability to have children from Stephen, as if it were the real truth. At first, I tried to just ignore it all. But Leah, using her position as the president's daughter, turned her popularity in my department against me. My supervisors, succumbing to her influence, began to reproach me for any little things, hinted that I should not offend Leah. It was as if no one noticed my merits, and attempts to work conscientiously became meaningless when I was removed from major projects, handing them over to people close to Leah. This continued until the situation became unbearable. I no longer had the strength to endure this pressure, and realizing that it was time to move on, I wrote a letter of resignation. Despite the difficult decision, I quickly found a job. At an interview at a new company, I was told, "We need someone as capable and responsible as you." I felt like I was finally appreciated. Here I was able to prove myself, and my diligence, my work did not go unnoticed. I soon gained the recognition and respect of my colleagues, and my boss even took the time to talk to me personally, carefully listening to my suggestions and ideas. This boss, with whom I found a common language so easily, became the person who returned to me the lost feeling of confidence and hope. He was an honest, kind and fair leader, a man who knew what hard work and lack of favoritism meant. Here, in this new office, there was not a shadow of the old nepotism, and I felt that for the first time in a long time I was working in a place where everything depends only on my efforts, talent, and perseverance. And that person, my current boss, turned out to be Patrick. Patrick supported me through the darkest period of my life, when I was in the shadow of the past, overshadowed by cruel betrayal and separation from Stephen. Being around, he became someone who listened to me patiently, understood my doubts and fears, sometimes even before I realized them myself. Our dinner conversations, which initially concerned only work matters, gradually turned into frank conversations, revealing more and more facets of each other. And then one day I realized that this person had become someone for me to whom I could trust my heart without fear that it would be broken. Our relationship developed naturally, like the birth of a new spring. Patrick turned out to be not only a reliable friend, but also a gentle, sensitive man who knew how to love sincerely and tenderly. One day, on a special evening, he proposed to me, holding my hands in his and looking into my eyes with such sincerity that it seemed to me as if the world around us had suddenly become brighter and warmer. But even at that moment, my past came alive again in the shadow of my fears, and I lowered my eyes and confessed to him my old fear, that maybe I would never be able to have children. Patrick, with his usual kindness and warmth, looked at me, and there was not a drop of disappointment in his gaze. "Of course, I would be happy if we had children in the future," he said softly, "but the most important thing, Caroline, is that I love you. You mean everything to me. Even if we don't have children, I will always be there for you." These words melted the last remnants of doubt in my heart, and, leaning over his shoulder, I suddenly realized that I was ready to spend my whole life with this man. That's how our new chapter began, a chapter filled with sincere love and support, for which I was ready to fight fate itself. A miracle happened soon after the wedding. We had a son, whom we named Liam. Then, a few years later, another happiness came to our house in the person of little Emma. Everything I've been through, everything I once didn't believe in, has made sense and is filled with joy. Being a parent turned out to be a difficult task, full of surprises, but every day with Liam and Emma reminded me that true happiness is the love and support that lives in our family. One day, at the wedding of our old friend from university, my thoughts went back to the days when life seemed full of pain and loss. The wedding was in full swing, the guests mingled in dancing and joyful conversations. I wanted some privacy, so I excused myself and headed towards the ladies' room. But suddenly, like a shadow from the past, a man appeared in front of me, whose presence was completely unwelcome here. It was Stephen. Oh, no. Why is he here? Flashed through my mind as I stood, frozen like a statue, momentarily forgetting where I was. My heart began to beat uneasily, but common sense quickly brought me back to reality. After all, the bride and groom and I were university friends, and of course there could be various acquaintances here. I tried to walk past him, trying not to let him see me. But as soon as I took a step, Stephen's loud voice tore through the space. Hey! I knew that rude tone, that mocking cackle. He seemed to be slightly drunk, and his voice echoed through the hall. Oh, so you're here too, he grumbled with a slight grin, eyeing me with a sarcastic smile. How old are you, Caroline? I barely recognized you. You've recovered decently. Stephen laughed, and his laugh was heavy and venomous, as if every sound was filled with malicious mockery. I jerked my head up, feeling a chill of pride envelop me, hiding my resentment behind a wall of indifference. You haven't changed a bit, I thought to myself, noting that his sarcasm, as before, was his only weapon, an expression of his weakness. Stephen, noticing my silence, immediately decided to call his family, as if he was going to attract additional viewers to his disgusting scene. A few minutes later, Leah's familiar face flashed through the crowd, and their teenage son with delicate features and thoughtful eyes stood next to her. When Leah saw me, she raised her eyebrows and sneered mockingly. Oh, it's been a long time, Caroline. Is it nervous overreading? She burst out laughing, her laughter ringing and mocking, like shards of ice. Ha, we've been through a lot, right? Are you still infertile, I see? Who would want a woman like that now? I stood there, shocked by their rude, shameless behavior, and the words stuck in my throat. As if shrouded in cold, I noticed how their son, who was standing next to me, blushed and lowered his eyes. His face expressed obvious embarrassment. Leah, as if not noticing her son's reaction, put him forward with mock pride. Oh yes, I completely forgot to introduce our boy, she said, deliberately boastful. Look at him, handsome, smart, a real genius, just like me. She continued to speak proudly about her son, as if his existence made their family the only personification of happiness and success. Her words sounded arrogant, her smile was poisoned by hidden malice. But contrary to her expectations, her son looked increasingly confused. He watched what was happening with a distorted expression on his face, as if every derogatory word his parents said about me caused him to protest internally. I sensed in his gaze some kind of inconsistency with what was happening. He must be a very kind child, I thought, surprised at my sympathy for this boy, who did not seem to share the cruelty of his parents. When I was about to leave, deciding that I had already stayed here too long, Stephen suddenly grabbed my arm tightly, detaining me. His face contorted, and he said fiercely, "You divorced me because of your infertility, and then you also dared to take money from us." Resentment sparkled in his eyes, as if he still could not accept that I had once left him. Leah turned to me, her voice filled with venom. "You're a lonely, useless woman," she said, as if she were delivering the final blow. "People like you don't deserve a penny. This money is needed by families like ours, Because we have a child who deserves a better life. Give us back the money you took. I was stunned by their selfishness and couldn't find the words. Leah and Stephen continued their accusations, completely unaware that their son was shifting uncomfortably from one foot to the other, clearly ashamed of their behavior. At that moment, their son finally raised his head and asked quietly but confidently, "Single means unmarried, right?" He looked at my left hand, as if noticing something important, and added with slight surprise, "But there's a ring on her finger." He pointed to my wedding ring, sparkling on the ring finger of my left hand. Stephen and Leah froze, staring at my hand. Realization slowly dawned on their faces. Their smug smiles disappeared, and they were replaced by bewilderment. Leah turned pale, and Stephen looked furious. A circle of curious guests formed around us, who watched what was happening with interest. Before I could recover from their astonished stares, my children, Liam and Emma, appeared among the guests, anxiously looking around for me. In her spontaneity, Emma resolutely approached, fearlessly looking at Stephen and Leah, and said, as always expressively and directly, "Aunt and Uncle, you should not talk so loudly at the wedding, you are disturbing other people." I couldn't help but smile at her confidence, and Liam, more restrained and well-mannered, but clearly annoyed at this moment, added with a challenge that he rarely allowed himself, "Mom, we've been looking for you. You're late." His calm determination and direct gaze gave the situation a special strength. Stephen turned to me, stunned, as if he could hardly believe his eyes. "Wait. Mom," he said, as if the word was unbelievable. I smiled gently and, slightly removing the children from the shocked looks of the ex-husband and his wife, introduced them. "Yes, let me introduce my children to you. This is my son Liam and my daughter Emma." The stunned look on Stephen's face was genuine. His eyes widened as he looked around at the children, unable to comprehend what was happening. Leah looked at Liam as if trying to find something familiar that could explain her distrust. You couldn't be. You're infertile," she whispered, clearly shocked. Liam, frowning slightly at their immodest curiosity, hugged my hand, as if feeling that I needed support at this moment. Her gaze was persistent and appraising, especially when she noticed that Liam was wearing a school uniform, the strict and neat look of a private high school known throughout the city. It's the uniform of that famous school," she said, trying to hide her surprise. I replied calmly, "Yes, Liam passed the entrance exams and entered it. He worked hard and we are proud of him." Leah seemed speechless, her gaze darting from me to the children as she tried to realize that I, the woman she thought was broken, was now a happy mother. "And my daughter, Emma," I added, patting her shoulder, "is going to take the exams at this school next year." Emma, smiling proudly, glanced at Stephen and Leah as if to demonstrate her confidence. "And you know," I added, feeling a wave of confidence wash over me, "Liam recently became a participant in a young violinist competition. He does it with great zeal." Stephen and Leah continued to stare at us, and I noticed that even in their arrogant glances, something resembling a confession slipped through. "You must have seen him," I continued. "He attracted a lot of attention at a recent event, and even the media noticed his game." At that moment, I felt pride for my son fill me and muffle all previous resentments. Leah and Stephen stood stunned, as if their own words were echoing back to them, destroying their confidence. The sight of their confusion seemed even funny to me. "I thought you were infertile. How can you have children like that?" Stephen whispered, confused and broken. I looked at him calmly and with a light, almost triumphant smile replied, "As you can see, life is surprisingly multifaceted. We all deserve happiness, and as you can see, I have found it. So, Stephen, Leah, you look happy, and I am sincerely glad about it. But please, let's not interfere in each other's lives anymore. We don't have anything in common anymore." When I was about to take the children away, Patrick came up to us. He looked at me, at the children, lightly but warily, then looked at Stephen and Leah, and a slight worry showed on his face. "Hey, what's going on here?" he asked, smiling and not even suspecting that he had become the central figure in this unspoken clash. "The main event is about to begin." But as soon as Patrick spoke, I noticed that Stephen's face turned even paler, and even Leah, usually confident and proud, was taken aback when she recognized in him the young and successful Mr. Lopez, who became the president of the parent company that owned her father's company. At the moment when I was looking for a job, the parent company contacted me, and that's where Patrick and I met. Even then, he was not only a respected and experienced leader, but also a man who aroused genuine admiration among his subordinates. Last year, Patrick was appointed president of the company on the recommendation of the former head, Leah's father. "So, Mr. Lopez, what's the awkward situation?" "What happened here?" asked Patrick, trying to defuse the situation. However, his gaze had already noticed the tension emanating from Stephen and Leah, and it was felt that he would not leave everything just like that. My son Liam didn't hesitate, took a step forward and said decisively, "Dad, I heard these people calling Mom infertile and fat, and that's why Emma and I came to help her." His words were simple and artless, but they rang out clearly in that hushed moment, exposing all the meanness that Leah and Stephen were trying to hide behind their arrogance. Emma, pressing herself into me, nodded approvingly, confirming her brother's words. Patrick turned slightly pale, his expression became stern and cold, like a person who has heard something completely unacceptable. "I've heard some rumors, but I didn't expect people to come to this point without losing all respect," he said quietly, but there was a hidden threat in his tone. Stephen suddenly fussily began to justify himself, as if hoping to mitigate the situation. "No, Mr. Lopez, you misunderstood. I would never say something like that about the president's wife, of course not." His voice broke, and his gaze darted between Patrick and Leah's faces. "Isn't that right, Leah?" he said, laughing strangely, turning to his wife. "You just misunderstood, didn't you?" But Leah, nervously grabbing his hand, excitedly objected, "I can't keep quiet, Stephen. It was this woman who stole my money, she ruined our lives, I will never forgive her for this." She looked up at Patrick, barely hiding her dislike. She has to give everything back to us, because it's us who really need this money for our son." Stephen, seeing that her words were beginning to annoy Patrick, tried to soften her antics. "Leah, think before you speak. We can't afford for him to get mad at us. Do you understand that our contract may be terminated if we interfere in their affairs?" Their argument grew louder, and a crowd of curious guests began to gather around us, watching this public debriefing. Their son, who had been silent all this time, suddenly shouted, his voice cutting through the noise and attracting attention. "Stop it already," he said loudly, and there was a mixture of resentment and shame in his voice. "It's already impossible for me to listen to this. You quarrel and insult people, call her fat and infertile, demand money, and then it turns out that I was born because of some kind of affair. I'm the child of an affair, an unwanted child, and I have to listen to this?" His voice trembled, and I saw tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm ashamed of you," he added, looking at Stephen and Leah with despair and pain that exposed the truth about his feelings. Stephen and Leah froze, realizing that their own son had condemned them in front of everyone. Their faces turned pale, and their eyes were filled with fear and embarrassment as the gazes of the guests around, full of condemnation, rushed at them. When I looked around, I noticed how the eyes of all the guests were fixed on us, and Leah, confused and stunned, blushed and lowered her head. Despite the fact that the past with Stephen and Leah left me bitter, I couldn't help but admire their son. His actions, his honesty and sincere sense of justice were strikingly different from the behavior of his parents. He didn't deserve to be judged, and I felt an inner urge to support him in this embarrassment. But before I could say a word, Patrick, my husband, stepped forward and said softly, "Thank you for protecting my wife from these insults. You are really a kind and decent boy." He gently placed his hand on Stephen's son's head, as if telling him by this gesture that he understands and appreciates his action. Smiling, I added with a slight grin, and about the fact that I'm a little chubby, it's actually true, I said, stroking my rounded belly. But by the way, I'm pregnant. At that moment, I felt Emma and Liam hug me proudly and encouragingly, as if making my answer even more weighty. I was in the first months of pregnancy with our third child, and looking at the faces of the people around me, I realized that this child was a symbol of a new life that supported me at every moment. Through tears in my eyes, I looked at Leah's son, full of compassion and kindness. You're not an unwanted child at all. Your mom and dad love you and are proud of you, I said softly, and looking at Leah and Stephen, I put all the sincerity into these words so that he would feel his importance. Stephen's son looked up at his parents with a surprised, hopeful look. Really? He asked hopefully. Leah and Stephen immediately nodded, their faces reflecting something like sincere remorse. Yes, of course, they hastily replied. You are our pride, you are very important to us. Seeing the joy reappear on the boy's face, I felt deeply relieved. And this was the completion for me, which was necessary in order to let go of bitter memories forever. Let's get back to the celebration, I suggested, and each of us, accepting this simple truth, went to our seats, regaining peace. So this episode, this dramatic scene, dissolved, leaving old grudges behind. When the wedding came to an end, my family and I were heading for the exit, when suddenly Leah and Stephen, holding their son's hand, came up to us. Liam and Emma immediately stood up, as if to shield me from them, but Patrick gently patted their shoulders, calming them down. Stephen and Leah froze in front of us, and I saw genuine regret in their eyes. Forgive us, Leah said softly, looking directly at me. It's a pity that we didn't realize this sooner. Stephen nodded and added, We're sorry for everything we've done, including today. Thank you for showing us our mistake. It was the first apology I had heard from them in all these 15 years. Something in their tone sounded sincere, and maybe the birth of their son really changed them. I smiled, but in my heart I felt that all these years had made me stronger, and all that was left of the past no longer had power over me. Really? I said, raising my eyebrows. After all this time? And with that one question, I turned away from them, showing that my path now lies in a different direction. Liam immediately offered to help me with the bags and, taking one with a small sign of motherhood, gently hugged it to himself. Emma, not lagging behind, threw a coat over my shoulders and happily said, Their care and love surrounded me, and I felt that our house was full of sincere tenderness that I could not express in words. At that moment, I swore to myself that I would protect their smiles, their happiness, our life, which Patrick and I had built with such hard work. Dad's famous homemade hamburgers will be for dinner tonight, Patrick said, and Liam and Emma's faces immediately lit up with joy. Hooray! They exclaimed in unison, overwhelmed with happiness. Looking at their shining eyes, I knew that, having left the pain of the past, I left all the resentments behind, finding a real, quiet, and lasting joy that now belonged only to us.